Hey there, how y'all doing? This is data on trail, not on trail anymore. So I'm coming to you today because I have finished up round 6 of my 2025 Appalachian Trail hikes, and thought I'd do a little review of how that went and update you a little bit on what that trip was like and different things that I learned about myself and about a different kind of hiking. And what my plans are for next year. So the highlights are that I finished over 558 miles. Actually, I'm at 558 or 559, something like that. And that means I am 1/4 of the way done with the Appalachian Trail now. I've been at it for a little over a year, so that's maybe not great progress from a thru hiker's perspective, but for this old hiker, I'm perfectly happy with that. So I think that's good for this year, and I think I'm done hiking the Appalachian Trail for 2025. This time I hiked for 6 days, and I covered 78 miles in those 6 days, and I slack packed all of those. And I'll actually talk a little bit about slack packing and what my experiences were like later on in this video. But it was the most miles per day I've ever hiked, and of course that's partly because I was slack packing, so I was just carrying a day's worth of food and water in my backpack, and then coming back to a hostel each evening. I did that with the help of the folks from Stanimals, and I'll do a review of them here in a minute also. It was a really nice time of year to be hiking because it was fall in Virginia, and I had not seen fall in Virginia before. I've been in the Smokies, but this was the first time I'd hiked in the fall in Virginia, and it was really beautiful. And I had really good weather. It got warm maybe one day, but not too hot. And I got one little tiny bout of rain, but nothing to really write home about. So I had great weather and beautiful conditions. And I saw some other hikers, and it was a really nice round. And I'm really happy that I'm up over 1/4 of the way done now. So I was able to do the slack packing because I took advantage of the services offered by Stanimals 328 hostel in Glasgow, Virginia. And a couple of guys there who serve as shuttle drivers and hosts to the hostel. A guy named Daytona Mike and another guy named Boomhauer. And they were really good about getting me to and from the trail when I needed to go there, even though some of it was pretty early in the morning. They had a lot of other guests also while I was there. And I got good advice from them also on what each day's hike would be like. That helps because then I would know kind of what to expect, which ones had nice scenery, which parts of the trail were going to be a little more of a challenging climb, or downhills that were going to be rockier than others, things like that. So it was. Stanimals is a hostel. I mean, it's a real trail experience. So I was in a semi-private room with a twin bed, solid mattress, plenty of pillows, blankets, all that. Good shower. There is Glasgow's not a really big town, but it's a pretty hiker-friendly town. So there's a Dollar General down the street, and there's a restaurant in town that I had a really nice salmon salad at one point. So overall, it was a good experience. There were some upsides and downsides to it. So slack packing in general is something I've done a couple of times. I think I had done it a total of maybe 3 days out of the 40-plus days I'd been on trail so far on the Appalachian Trail. And I did it 2 of the days I'd been on the M.Y.T.H Trail. This time I did 6 days in a row of it. And there were some real pluses and some things that I learned about that I wasn't so fond of. So first of all, it was a great way to tick off miles. Like I said before, I did more miles per day on this trip, like 13 or 14 miles a day, as compared to 10 or 11 I normally do. So I was able to hike more miles, and the miles I hiked were much easier because I wasn't carrying hardly any weight. But it wasn't that much greater distance, and now part of that was due to that it was later in the year and the daylight hours were kind of limited, some things like that. It was nice to have a hot shower every night when I got back to the hostel, and also to have a hot meal that night and a hot breakfast the next morning before I headed out. So it was it's a very cushy way for the evening part of the hikes. But that also, after 2 or 3 days, kind of became the downfall for me, from my perspective. Honestly, it got a little boring after 2 or 3 days. A little bit to my surprise, I really missed the camping part of backpacking, the setting up my tent, having just 2 or 3 other hikers at a hostel or a campsite, or being by myself, and being able to take my time in the evenings and mornings. I missed that more than I thought I would. There's a lot of technology in the hike when I did the slackpacking. That is, when I came off trail, I would have phone access. The minute the shuttle driver got in toward Glasgow, I'd have good internet access, so I could talk with Mrs. Data, which was great. But also, I would get emails and I would get notices from whoever else was going on, and then I'd get to the hostel, and there's a big widescreen TV with Netflix, and there are other people there having conversation, and so the technology kind of isn't my favorite part of life, even when I'm not hiking. So it really wasn't my favorite part of the slackpacking option, staying at a hostel. Slackpacking out of a hostel also proved to be much more social than I factored in. I thought because I was hiking late in the season there wouldn't be too many other hikers staying at the hostel, but it turns out there were a lot of people. One day I think there were 7 or 8 other hikers in the hostel. There was only one night when I was the only person at the hostel. That was my last night. And they were all really nice, interesting people. And I had really good conversations with other hikers. I learned some things which I'll probably cover in a later video from a couple of them. Many of them were southbound or through hikers, or they were through hikers who were now southbound who were completing a flip-flop hike. And I had interesting conversations with all of them, but every night it was a different set of hikers, and there were a lot of them some evenings. So it was a lot of kind of intense conversation and social interaction. And I'm an introvert who really likes people, which is always a challenge for me, because I like people, but I like people in small doses and 1 or 2 at a time. So, meeting a whole group of other people every single night, I found kind of psychically exhausting. So I didn't actually like that part of it very much. And the shame of it is, each of the individual hikers that I met were really cool people, and I learned something from them. I just, after meeting 10 or 15 hikers over the course of 4 or 5 days, I was worn out just trying to keep track of who was who, and it was not as much fun as what I have when I'm hiking more solo or just with a couple of friends out in the mountains. So, and like I said, I really did miss the camping part of backpacking. The slower evening, the slower morning, setting up camp, all that kind of good stuff. So I think I'll do something that Daytona Mike suggested toward the end of my hike there when I was talking to him about this. He said I could think about slackpacking as in terms of a hybrid model. So I could go to a hostel and slackpack for a day or two and then hike for a day or two. And that is kind of what I've done in the past, and I think that's a more comfortable version of this for me. It's not that I won't ever slackpack again, but I don't think that I'll ever slackpack for 5 or 6 days in a row again. It wasn't that much fun. I didn't make that much more mileage progress. So, as I said, I did meet a lot of other fellow hikers and had some really good conversations with them and learned a lot from them. I'm going to rattle off a few of their trail names. There are some people I'm going to miss because I've just forgotten because I met so many people. But in particular, Timbers, a young man who was southbound, who we had some good conversations about life and faith and belief and why we're hiking the trail and who we are. And he's a much younger guy, so it was an interesting intergenerational kind of conversation. And he recommended a book to me, which I think I've shared on a previous video, and I'm busy reading now. So that was a nice fellow to meet. I met Mama Turtle on trail, and she had actually been at Stanimals the day before. And we had a fun conversation right on trail, actually. And I also met a young woman who was finishing up her through hike. Her trail name was Tic Tac, and Tic Tac had hiked the whole trail northbound this year already, except there's one little portion right there between Daleville and Rockfish, or Daleville and something else, that she had to skip because she got sick when she was on trail and had to come off trail for a couple of weeks. And she wanted to join back up with her tramley, so when she came back on trail last spring or summer, she skipped one section to catch back up to her family, and so now she was there in the fall solo, doing just this one section by herself, and she seemed in really good spirits. You know, she had hiked most of the trail with a tramily, and now she was hiking alone, but she seemed really comfortable with that. She turned me on to the idea that the Dollar General in town actually had a pretty good selection of salads and fresh vegetables and fruits. So, you know, fresh strawberries and chocolate milk became my go-to meal a couple of evenings, or dessert meal kind of thing, a couple of evenings while I was there. So thanks to Tic Tac for that. Talked with a young woman named Sniff, who is a follower of my YouTube channel and had seen some things I did earlier in the year. Sniff was also finishing up her through hike. She was at, I think she was southbound now. She might have been southbound the whole time, actually. And she had hiked with Tic Tac earlier in the year, and they knew each other, but she got to the hostel the day after Tic Tac. So I think they might have met up on trail and done a little bit of the hiking in that section together. So it was just kind of funny. It's also the first person I've met who was a follower on this YouTube channel who I met in person. And one piece of advice I got from Sniff is I was whining a little bit that I was only going 10 or 11 miles a day, except when I was slackpacking. And she said, what's the big deal with that? She's through hiking the whole trail, and she's been averaging 10 or 11 miles the whole time. And I said, God, how long you been at it? And she said, well, she said it would probably take her 7 months by the time she was done. But, you know, and she's hiked some longer days, she said. But she also said this was kind of 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 miles once in a while. Those were kind of the days of hiking that she liked, when she didn't end up blown out or exhausted. She had plenty of time to enjoy camp and to not have to rush around in the morning. And it was nice to hear, to meet a hiker who was actually completing a through hike, moving at that kind of a pace. And it actually did encourage me to think that going forward, I'm not going to worry so much about the mileage again. I think I might have said that before, but again, I'm going to try to let myself off the hook on mileage. I've got a couple of years to finish this trail, and when I hike between 10 and 15 miles a day, depending on conditions and things like that, and time of year, I have really nice days. I enjoy those days. When I try to get up over 15, I can hike further than that, but it ends up making hiking more of a job and less enjoyable. So I'm going to ratchet back my expectations about my own mileage a little bit, thanks to this conversation that I had with Sniff. So thanks, Sniff. There were two young women who I got a kick out of, who were finishing up a southbound hike, who didn't call themselves Sobos. They called themselves Slowbos, because they said they were moving so slow that Slowbos in their mind stood for really slow southbound hikers. And they weren't really moving all that much slower than Sniff or a lot of other people, but I think that they were enjoying so much, sort of intentionally taking their time about it. They were really enjoying their hike and their friendship, and I thought that was great. They were very funny and very energetic and positive, even though at this point they'd been on the trail for 5 or 6 months. They were at the hostel for a couple of days, and then they headed on southbound. And then lastly, I met a bunch of other hikers whose trail names I can't remember. But on my last day on trail, I came off trail at the Long Mountain viewpoint or wayside, where there's a parking lot and a place to get on and off trail. And I was northbound, and another hiker came off southbound. And she called her shuttle service and put her pack down. And then after a couple of minutes, she walked over from the other side of the wayside where she had come off, because we were going opposite directions, to where I was. And it's, you know, what we usually do as hikers. You settle in for a minute, and then you meet the other people who are also waiting on their shuttles, like I was. And she walked over and asked me, was my trail name Data on Trail? And I said, yes. Why, it is. Why, are you familiar with my YouTube channel? And she said, yes, I'm M.Y.T.H. And I'm a follower of yours. So that warmed my heart, because M.Y.T.H was one of the first people that followed my YouTube channel now some 6 or 7 months ago. And M.Y.T.H was finishing, or is probably still, hopefully, she's finishing a flip-flop hike that was kind of being done the same way my attempt was earlier this year. That is, she started northbound at Rockfish Gap a couple of weeks after I did. And back in the spring, before we both hit the trail, we had exchanged some discussion on the YouTube channel about, maybe we'd get lucky, and because I was going to come on and off trail, our paths would cross and things like that. And they just, obviously they had not crossed to this point. And lo and behold, this person whose path I hoped I would cross walked out of this into this wayside on my last day on trail as she was heading back southbound now. And we had a really nice conversation for 15 or 20 minutes. And I got to ask her a lot of questions about how her flip-flop hike had gone. Sounded like it had gone pretty well. She told me a lot about some things about Katahdin that I didn't know, and some other parts of the trail up north that she'd finished. And my only regret is that other than this YouTube channel, I don't really have any way to get a hold of Jim Nye and maybe do some trail magic for her or send some friends to help her, encourage her on her way. So if anybody sees this video and you cross Jim Nye's path, or any of these other folks I've mentioned, frankly, give them some encouragement. If you want to shout out on my channel so I can know where they're at, maybe I can send them some digital trail magic or just wish them well. It was impressive that I did meet a whole bunch of people southbound and flip-flopping, probably a total of maybe 15 of them, who they were getting on with it, even though fall was descending rapidly on Virginia. So I hope that they're doing well. One of those things I often do when I'm doing a post-hike review is talk about what new gear I used. And this time, the only thing that was really new, gear-wise for me, was my shoes. I hiked in Altra Lone Peak 9 Pluses this time. First time I've ever been in Ultras. First time I've ever been in zero-drop shoes. And I gotta say, I'm a convert. I will hike in these for a while now. The Lone Peaks were very comfortable for me. I didn't have the kind of plantar fasciitis issues that I've had in the past on my right heel. They did change my gait, or I changed my gait in them. They're not a barefoot shoe, but the Lone Peaks it's a pretty thin cushion. So you feel the ground as you're walking on it a little bit more. And I actually ended up finding that very helpful. It meant that if I stepped on a rock that wasn't real stable or that was slick or something, I sort of felt that in my foot before I put a lot of weight on it, so I could stop myself and find a different place to put my foot. So it wasn't like being barefoot or even in barefoot shoes, but it was closer to that than the Speed Goats. And I've hiked in Speed Goats now for most of about a year and a half, and I really enjoyed that, except it does seem like, compared to the Lone Peaks, the Speed Goats kind of completely encapsulate the foot, or my foot. So if I stepped on a rock and it moved a little bit, the Lone Peak just kind of went with it and took my ankle with it. So I had more of a tendency when hiking in the Speed Goats to roll my ankle, not badly, but a little bit, or to have the shoe slide and my foot go with it, and not really be able to tell from the feelings in my foot the quality of the foot placement that I had gotten. Whereas in the Lone Peaks, I could tell if I wasn't on a solid rock, or if the rock was too pointy or was slick or something. I could feel all of that in my foot and make adjustments. So I don't think I rolled my ankle out hardly at all, if at all, the whole time. I didn't get any blisters, which was great. I haven't had too much of a trouble with that, except folks might remember I did have a little bit of an issue on the Ice Age Trail earlier this year. I wore the same kind of socks I always wear. I really enjoyed them. It did change the Lone Peak 9 Pluses did change my gait a little bit, or I changed it based on watching some videos. The zero drop flat bottom of them means that I strike my heel more on the pad at the back of my, sort of like the difference between hitting here on your wrist or hitting here on the pad of your hand. That's what happened with my foot, and because my foot wasn't held at an artificial angle. So it was more like walking naturally. So because I landed on the pad of my heel, it didn't irritate my plantar as much. And then also when I pushed off, and this was a little bit odd for me, because the toe box is wider and my feet could splay out, the ball of my feet on my arch ended up doing a lot more work because they weren't like rigidly held in place. And so because of that, my feet actually got a little bit tired in them the first couple of days because I was using cartilage and bones and small muscles that normally are just locked in place in the more controlled type of shoe that I've worn all of my adult life since I started hiking and running again. So that additional sort of natural movement to my foot meant my foot got tired in a way that was sort of like when you first use a set of muscles you haven't used in a while. But they didn't cramp up, and they weren't sore, they weren't blistered, it didn't hurt. It just felt like my feet were getting a workout. And I enjoyed that. By day 3, when I would push off with the front of my foot, I could kind of feel I was moving at a more consistent pace. I think my mileage, in a sense, or my pace was a little steadier and a little quicker with shorter strides, and I was a lot more comfortable moving at a slightly quicker pace just because I could sort of know where my feet were more solidly and more subconsciously almost. So clearly you can tell I'm a big fan of the Lone Peak Altra 9+s at this point. I'm such a big fan, I bought another type of Altras, not the Lone Peaks, but that I'm wearing now, the Torin 8s. They have a little bit more of a padding, so that these are more my knock-around in shoes at the house now. So I'm a big fan of the Zero Drop overall at this point also. So I guess lastly, I always like to end with a little bit of what comes next. I said earlier that I'm done hiking the Appalachian Trail for 2025. Now, part of that, and this is part of what brought the hike I was on to an end a couple days early, part of that is because the daylight hours have gotten short enough that it's harder to hike at my 2-mile-an-hour pace up in the mountains and cover any more on the Appalachian Trail than 8 to 10 miles a day, because I'm not that fast and I don't have that much daylight left. Having said that, I still think I might have a couple of hikes left in me on the M.T.YH Trail, which I'm, again, as a reminder, or for people who don't know, I'm hiking both the Appalachian Trail in sections and the M.T.YH Trail in sections intermittently. And so I can get to the M.T.YH Trail, since I'm based in northern Illinois. I can get to the M.T.YH Trail up in Wisconsin much quicker and easier for just like a 2 or 3 day hike whenever the weather's good than I can get all the way down to the Appalachian Trail. So I may have a couple of 2 or 3 day long hikes on the M.T.YH Trail left, probably around Janesville and the Kettle Moraine and that part of it, on the kind of the southernmost part of the M.T.YH Trail up the eastern flank of it. And then, in regards to the Appalachian Trail, I'm going to have a whole separate video on what my plan is for the Appalachian Trail next year and some things I hope to do with this channel, as I'm going to try to have it evolve a little bit next year. So if there's, again, things that y'all would like to see, if you've gotten this far in the video and you'd like for me to cover some other information or do something differently, I'd appreciate hearing that. Hopefully you'll look forward to the next video where I announce what my plans for 2026 will be. And so with that, this is yours truly, Data on Trail, signing off, wishing each of you, as usual, happy trails.